Hello there, everyone. This is Ben Morse, comic book artist, and I wanted to put together a quick video showing another one of my big influences on We Are Scarlet Twilight, and that video today is about Buck Rogers. I'm sure most of you have heard of Buck Rogers. It's a pretty classic sort of science fiction property. He had a serial back in the day, has had cartoons, comics, merchandise, all that stuff. It gets a little bit overshadowed, I think, by Flash Gordon, who has stood the test of time just a little bit better for a few reasons, but there's a lot that's particular about Buck Rogers that's really cool. A lot of it went into Scarlet Twilight, and it would be, I thought, fun to take a look at some of those things, discuss them, and also to show off, obviously, some beautiful high-res artwork of the posters, merchandise, comics, things like that you see from the older Buck Rogers stuff. I mentioned We Are Scarlet Twilight. It's my comic book that's heavily influenced by old movie serials, Golden Age comics, Batman the Animated Series, that type of thing. So if you're into that, I definitely would appreciate if you go over to zoop.gg and check it out. It's going to be live for 9 more days. It's got a collection of the entire story with tons of extras. It's got all the individual issues, some extra stuff you might want to check out that's cool. And I think if you're into this stuff, if you like classic adventure, sort of just high adventure, optimism, classic sort of American storytelling, I think you're going to like this one. So I'd appreciate it if you checked it out. The first thing I wanted to show here was this movie poster for the Buck Rogers serial. If you haven't seen it, it is one of the better serials, in my opinion. I would definitely check it out. It stars, another reason for the confusion with Flash Gordon is they star the same guy. He's called Larry Crabb in this poster, but he's Buster Crabbe all the same. And this poster in particular is one of the things that influenced my variant cover for number 4 in a few ways. This logo is very reminiscent of what you see in another one. Another cool thing you'd see is different art styles on the same poster. So you'd have one illustration that was in one style, could be very cartoony. Other times you'd have sort of treated photographs. In this case, I took some more realistic images from the other covers and interiors of the issue. And that was an attempt to kind of go with, you see these types of things here that are almost photographs, and then things like this that are drawings that are a little bit cruder, but obviously have a ton of energy and things that would be impossible to capture with photography. So they didn't really have any problem mixing and matching this stuff. And I think that kind of adds to the, if nothing else, it puts you in the time period. I also think it's kind of good on its own merits. There's just a lot there to visually jump into. This is a example of the comic strip, a little bit different than Flash Gordon. While you do have some grays in this feathering here, you'd see something that was a lot more graphic. There's not all the shading and draftsmanship you get with Raymond. I do have to think, though, that this is a little simpler to look at. There's a cleanness to it, a directness to it. And while I definitely don't want to say it's better than Alex Raymond, I don't really think it is. To be fair, I like a lot about what this has. I think it has a lot of its own merits in terms of just being graphic, clear, fun, and easy to go with. This is a reproduction comic, or well, it's a collection, I think, of the strips. Great stuff here. You can see a lot of Captain Lancet in these designs, a lot of We Are Scarlet Twilight in these sort of Art Deco-y airships. And one thing that was cool about Buck Rogers is you didn't just get these kinds of rocket ships, which you'd see a lot of in, Rex Dexter of Mars, Flash Gordon, a million other ones. In Buck Rogers particularly, you'd get a lot of these much bigger versions of those ships, almost like the capital ships of that style. And I don't see that in a lot of places, and it was fun to see that turn up quite a bit in looking at this stuff for Buck Rogers. So a bit of merchandise they had. I really had hoped to put something together like this for one of the earlier campaigns of Scarlet Twilight. Unfortunately, with the fulfillment we were doing, it just wasn't going to work out to be cost effective, but this is really cool. I definitely want to do something like it one day. This I couldn't resist showing off. This is a children's Halloween costume, and this is cool as all get out. This is a great design. You've got these cool pants, this branded holster, this kind of logo where it's him reversed that you see in a bunch of places. I love that they went and put all these little details in here. And this helmet especially, or mask, is just amazing. They got that same logo embossed on there and a really good recreation of the exact shape of his comic book goggles there. That would have been really cool to have as a kid. This is some Big Little books. I'm a big fan of these designs. I looked at them a lot when I was doing the variant covers for issues 1 through 4 of Scarlet Twilight. These designs would be all over the place, but they always were pretty cool looking. I think these books just had great designs on them. I love the typeface you get in some of them, and it was something that managed to look cool if the illustrations were really crude, like you see here, or even if they were more involved and nicer looking. Somehow these big little books always seem to work. This one here is probably my favorite because of the fact that this was early in science fiction and visual science fiction especially, so people were just doing whatever thought they looked cool that day as far as their jet rocket stuff. It didn't We didn't have that built up storytelling language for things like that, and it's nice to have that sort of shorthand visually for storytelling purposes. But it's also nice to see these weird things that you wouldn't get once people had a very set image in their mind of what these things should look like. This to me looks almost like something Chris Foss would draw in the 60s and 70s rather than something from the 1930s. So it's always cool to see that. These are some Frazetta covers from much later on in the 50s. And I included those just because they're iconic and they're great. And also to think of how cool it would have been to see Flash Gordon in this style, and especially this one, which is one of my all time favorites, after seeing this for so long. That must have been just such a great update and a fun revitalization, I think, of the character. I also see this a lot. Buck is a one-man army of Greased Lightning. That is a great thing to just slap on every cover for no good reason. I think that people should definitely do more silly things like that because it is pretty amusing. Another nice cover here. And these guys actually I did look at when I was designing Maxie's clones for We Are Scarlet Twilight. When we get to the end of issue 1, he wakes up in the future. We find out that his sidekick has managed to clone himself to keep taking care of him throughout the decades he was in a coma, and gave them all these little sort of bolts here like Frankenstein, and that was the main reference I was making. But seeing this image really made me think, oh yeah, you could just sort of do some really small thing to indicate these guys are some other type of thing. They're not just a guy. They have something else going on. I think these guys might have been mind controlled in some way, but it's a good shorthand that gets a point across without having it do too much. Another Frazetta image. This one I think everyone's seen, but just one of the greatest images of all time as far as comic book illustration is concerned. These are some cards. They almost look like stamps, but I think they were thicker and were just ripped apart after being in one sheet. Definitely want to do something like this with Scarlet Twilight in the future. I looked at a few different card layouts that were back in the day, baseball cards as well, and they weren't really that fun. The ones in the 80s and 90s that I would collect when I was a kid were just such a blast. Definitely going to look at something and see if I can cobble together a design moving forward that captures a little bit of this retro stuff, but also has a little more, I think, modern visual interest to it. And I have a few of the strips here. Again, you're seeing how much more graphic this is. They'd use Zipatone. They have some of this, but you got a lot of big black shading here and shapes rather than your modeled, just really sculpted Alex Raymond forms that you get in Flash Gordon. And I wanted to look at these buildings in particular because they are something I was looking at a lot when I would be making up my skylines for We Are Scarlet Twilight. I love their big, bold shapes. They're almost always lit from below. I think there's a big debt there from Fritz Lang's Metropolis, and that is one of the coolest looking examples of that all time. But you also, have these weird bridges, which again is from, I think, Metropolis. But if you actually look at the Buck Rogers serial, which again is really fantastic, they'd have some really good establishing shots of these boxy, sparsely detailed futuristic cities that were very, very cool to see. And it was definitely something that influenced these drawings in We Are Scarlet Twilight in a big way. So moving on, here's another example. I think this is a Sunday strip, not the best reproduction here, but I think it highlights one of the things that made Buck Rogers very popular for a long time, in that it was a lot more faster action, a lot more hardware, a little less creature based. And you can see why this would catch on in a big way. There was just a little more Star Wars, I would say, to it than some of the creatures and the quasi-political stuff you'd see in Flash Gordon. While I love them both, I definitely looked at Buck Rogers as kind of a lesser version without having checked it out through most of my life. When I finally did, I found that there was a lot there that was unique, that I enjoyed on its own merits. Again, some more of the strips, and just to highlight how great these graphics are. They are just simple shapes, very readable, probably reproduced really well compared to more feathered stuff that you'd see again in Flash Gordon. And again, this costume is fantastic and definitely the type of thing I'm going to be looking to emulate when I do the Scarlet Twilight sequel, which is going to be called Cobalt Crisis. And it's going to be, I think, a big fun story, a little bit of a different approach than the initial Scarlet Twilight series I was mentioning before that we're finishing up now and is live now on Zoop. But this one is going to be more like if Crisis on Infinite Earths or Secret Wars had happened in 1942. So we're going to have all those big universe-shattering things, surprise guest stars that I guarantee you won't see coming. But I have put clues in there that no one has quite figured out yet. Big surprises, big drama, high stakes, but all done in the visual language of these 1940s comics. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And you're going to see a lot of costumes like this guy here. Really cool stuff. And again, to speak on the costumes a bit, one thing that's really cool about Buck Rogers that I like, and I had a little bit of a nod to this in the fact that Captain Lancet's uniform changes from his classic look that you see in 1938, and again near the end of the story, we switch over at one point to a different costume. And I did think of that. One thing that was cool about Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers is I don't know if this was just a practicality issue because you had so many people doing different bits of merchandise. There was no easy way to communicate. I don't think they passed out model sheets. People were kind of just saying another thing and saying, oh, okay, kind of like that. So I think it was a bit of a game of visual telephone in addition to just trying to get something done fast. So you didn't really have like a set uniform the way Spider-Man has a set uniform or Green Lantern does when you look at Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers. You had some consistent elements. You had the jetpack, the shape of this gun here, all that stuff. Let me get a little closer there. But you had cool things that were kind of consistent, but also not completely uniform from thing to thing. So you had a Buck Rogers look, a Flash Gordon look, and not necessarily a complete, the belt's like this, the shoulders are like that, which I think is kind of cool. This I have to say I threw in just because it was a beautiful piece of old design. These illustrations are amazing. The designs of these ships are amazing and a little bit more mechanical than your slightly more streamlined hood ornament looking spaceships that you do see in other pieces. And that's one of the things I think that I take away from Buck Rogers is everything was just a little chunkier, a little more mechanical, a little more like a race car or something you'd see in a factory with pipes and things like that. And something I really enjoy about it. And again, some great, amazing typefaces here. I'm not a big fan of the main Buck Rogers logo. We've seen a lot of these comics. But this one is fantastic, as is the one they use for the movie serial posters. Again, some more comics, a little more feathering on this one. But, that's the cool thing about Buck Rogers you see here is everything was not necessarily super exotic Star Wars Mongo type locations. You'd have buildings, patterns that we're used to seeing in a Batman comic, but with a little bit of science fiction dressing it up. And that's one of the things that I really got into for Scarlet Twilight is that I wanted to do something that is a little bit more, has a little bit more Batman in it than just pure cyberpunk or pure Star Wars huge towers in the distance type things. I wanted to get that feel that to me really does scream 1930s, 1940s, gives you the atmosphere of that area and really brings you back into what it felt like to read some of those old comics. People like us who have obviously we're not around in that era, but do have an appreciation of those old stories. I definitely wanted to bring as much of that in as possible while still making the science fiction aspects of the story make sense. So the cityscapes you see here, there's a lot of Fleischer Brothers Superman, there's a lot of Batman the Animated Series, but there's a lot of Buck Rogers as well. And it was kind of because you could get imagery like this, which I think is an important part. And one of the things that made Buck Rogers have such a good appeal was it wasn't too far out there. It was a little bit more attached to our world. And the serial gives you a lot of that. I have a few more great posters here. from the serial. Great gadgets, things like that. Nice design on this typeface. Fantastic stuff. Great costumes, of course. This is probably the most iconic Buck Rogers look that there is as far as uniforms are concerned. And to speak to the universe being a little more grounded, one thing that was cool about Buck Rogers is it was kind of in our solar system. So you could still have imagery like this as a part of the story that was Manhattan plus. Water treatment stuff. This, I guess, takes place in Niagara Falls, which is cool. And then you have the lightning gun. You have spaceships. I really liked this particular setting that they fenced out with Buck Rogers. And I think a big part of its appeal was that it connected to our world a little bit more than other science fiction does. And you still get your monsters. You still get these weird dinosaur guys. You still get your space rockets, your crazy costumes with salad on top of the head, all the fun stuff you expect. But you have the imagery that, is very Metropolis like, and Fritz Lang's Metropolis, not necessarily Superman's Metropolis. You get factory imagery, you get skyscraper imagery. And I think that's a great mix. And that is definitely something, that I wanted to have in Scarlet Twilight, and things like these sort of engine-y looking pieces that could just be big and bold next to buildings and next to, again, these big bridges, skylines, things like that. So hopefully you liked this look at Buck Rogers. I've had a lot of fun going through it, and especially explaining, where I'd pull elements here and there to really supplement what I was trying to accomplish with Scarlet Twilight. Looking at Batman the Animated Series, looking at Flash Gordon, looking at this, looking at old Superman cartoons, and being able to pull the parts I really liked out of those and make one coherent adventure out of it was a really fun part of the series. So if you're into that stuff, I hope you'll head over to Zoop GG and check it out. And we have a great collection. We have single issues, anything you could want. I think you'll find it there. So if you're interested, I hope you'll give it a shot.